Hi, I'm Rosh from Energy Matters. Welcome to our podcast, Road to Zero, where we dive headfirst into all things renewable. Join us as we chat with industry experts, tech specialists, and some of your favorite TV and radio personalities, asking the renewable energy questions that you want answers to. Our goal, a zero carbon future. Now, in today's episode, I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by Con Hristodoulidis, who is the General Manager for Distributed Energy at the Clean Energy Council. How are we, Con?
Great, thanks, Rosh. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. First question, did I pronounce your surname correctly?
You're pretty spot on. You've done better than what I normally do.
No, I have trouble pronouncing my own surname, right? So I broke it down into three parts, and I hope to nailed it.
No, you did a great job. So, as I said, lots of people get it mixed up, and I've seen it spelt many different ways this week, so it's quite amusing.
No, I hear you. Well, look, thank you so much for joining me. I know you're an incredibly busy man, and it's been obviously a very busy time as well for for the Clean Energy Council and for Australia's renewable energy industry. So lots to talk about today, and we're going to be centering most of our conversation to anyone watching or listening today around the Cheaper Home Batteries program that has launched as from the 1st of July. As everybody who knows me well enough and follows Energy Matters and has seen us on TV, you would know we've been harping on for years about getting some federal assistance around battery storage, which we believe is the missing key and ingredient to every home and business in Australia achieving net zero. So for us, we are absolutely thrilled it's finally happened. Con, how hectic has it been for the Clean Energy Council prior to July 1st with all this going on?
Look, Roshan, since the announcement by the Energy Minister during the federal election of the Cheaper Home Battery Program, it's just been full steam ahead at the Clean Energy Council and for our members in obviously trying to understand what the program would mean and how to roll it out, but B, then helping the federal department, the Clean Energy Regulator, to set the rules in a 6-week period. It's just an amazing short period of time to get the rules right, but we got there. We got there by 1st of July, so it's great news.
Well, look, it's absolutely incredible, and I was lucky enough to catch a chat with the minister a couple of days ago when there was a battery installation launched at North Kira Surf Club by good friends at Recent Solar, part of Anchor Solex, the battery manufacturer. And it was the 2nd of July, and I said, so how's the program going? He goes, well, it's only day 2, but so far, so good. And although it was day 2, it seems like it's been happening for absolutely weeks because the announcement was made early, prior to the election. Good strategy on Labor's part in that respect. Yeah. And at the same token, it was something that the entire renewable energy industry and adopters of renewable energy technology have been praying for, which has been absolutely incredible. I mean, the cost of batteries traditionally have been very, very expensive. We've seen that come down in price anyway over the last few months, purely based on demand. But now we have this rebate in place. It just gives anyone who wants to take on a battery now about a 30% discount, which is absolutely extraordinary. So, Con, I have got a number of questions for you around the program. So I'm going to not smash you with questions, but we're going to have a conversation about the things I know I want to know about, and I'm sure our listeners want to know about as well. Is that okay with you?
That sounds awesome. Ready to go and ready to get stuck into it.
All right, good man. Thank you. So, Con, I guess the first thing I want to just understand and articulate for our listeners, and this is more so for consumers, and you may not be able to answer this specifically, but just generically, what would you say is the value that home batteries provide households and small businesses who have rooftop solar, and compared to those who don't actually have either technology themselves?
Yeah, look, the value is extraordinary. Like some research put out by the federal department said that people are saving on average from a solar panel about $1,500 per annum on their bill. Batteries pretty much double that savings for households. So if you've got a bill that's $3,500, and you can save $3,000 of it. We'll probably talk about paybacks later. But on a $10,000 battery with a 30% rebate, that payback period is extraordinarily short now, and it makes it really viable for a lot of people out there who have got solar to install the battery with it, or those who are thinking about getting solar to add the battery with it now.
I know, and if you look at like solar power, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, especially with COVID, right? So the one good thing, or there's a few good things, I suppose, COVID brought to the table, lots of bad things, but a couple of the good things were it encouraged people to work remotely or gave, people were forced to work remotely, which essentially meant anyone who had solar power installed at that point or got it installed during COVID, what if they were allowed to during the different phases of lockdown, meant that they were using pretty much all the power that they were generating because they were working from home. They could definitely put the appliances on, dishwasher, washing machine, aircon, heating, depending on what time of the year it was, and really utilize that electricity. But then now people are sort of going back to work, and or even in the hybrid situation, it doesn't really matter how much solar you have in your roof, because if you're not really using it and you're not storing it, all you're doing is selling it back into the grid. And we've just seen feed-in tariffs just come down. I did another review of my energy bill today, and there's a whole bunch of retailers offering 0 feed-in tariff. Or half a cent feed-in tariff. It was absolutely criminal. I could only find a couple of retailers offering an okay feed-in tariff, and that basically halved or quartered after you've used the first chunk each day. So it's pretty terrible. So having batteries obviously makes a massive difference, because you're not going to get a return investment from feed-in tariffs. So really, if we do talk about sort of payback periods and costs, I mean, what are the costs and payback periods, would you say, associated now with buying a home battery? And how does the new program, what does it do to reduce the upfront cost as a barrier to entry?
Yeah, look, the rule of thumb, 30% obviously off the cost of the battery system means that you're effectively taking a 30% reduction in your payback period. That's just a really simple mathematical thing. But as you said, if you're depending on your use of your energy and when you're at home and the size of your family and the type of appliances you have in terms of the energy, if you've got a fair bit of gas, this actually helps you to electrify the home, moving your cooktop to an induction cooktop, your hot water to electric hot water, all that type of stuff now becomes more viable for you as an investment, because you can produce the energy with your solar panel, store it in your battery and use it in the evening. So you mentioned about people doing those things during COVID, but still in the evenings, we're still watching TV. We're probably still washing dishes from dinner. If there's children in the household, you're probably getting them ready for bed. You're still running your heating or your air conditioning. So all those things where without a storage system, we're costing you money from the grid. And as you said, the feed-in tariff's low, but we can see the retail tariffs, even for the 1st of July, we had a sizable increase in the default market offer. They're costs you're avoiding now by having your storage, your battery, used in those evening periods, especially when demand for energy is high in those periods.
I was absolutely horrified about when I got my letter from my retailer, and I won't do a name and shame. I'll just call my retailer because I know they're not alone. But the increases across the board on all my tariffs were ridiculous. I mean, the supply charge went up by around 20%. The peak rate, the off-peak rate, the control load rates, everything went up, and my feed-in tariff came down. And even when I did, as I said a minute ago, when I did a comparison this morning, I couldn't really find anything that was in my favor. So fortunately for me, I have 20 kilowatts of solar power. I already had 38.4 kilowatt hours of battery storage, which I got installed immediately after Cyclone Alfred because we lost power for 9 days. So that kicked my bottom into gear to get batteries installed. And but if I was just having to buy electricity traditionally, through a retailer without solar power batteries, my bill would be astronomical. It's already high. It'd be absolutely criminal. So it is a real, when people are considering solar power technology, solar power panels and now batteries, I mean, really, you shouldn't really be looking outside of batteries, because really those two combined now is what anyone, home or business, can implement to really get some energy independence and really manage these escalating and ridiculous, energy hikes, if you like, which we're going to be hit with and have to pay no matter what. Con, one thing that, and I suppose with any good thing, you've always got to kind of look at it holistically and think, well, what are all the kind of problems that could arise? And I know, we call our industry the solar coaster, because really, I've been in it since 2009. We've definitely seen highs and lows, highs and lows. A number of those highs and lows are caused by, people involved in the industry, unfortunately, at times. And I guess one thing people really need some reassurance about is what's being done to protect their consumer rights and
Yeah.
consumer interests. So for anyone, listening or watching, any consumer thinking about buying a battery for themselves, I mean, how can they ensure they actually buy a battery that works and meets some Australian standards, meets their actual engine needs? And what sort of tips would you give them?
Yeah, there's probably two things that really will help consumers in this space. The first one I'll start with is the product itself. That the Clean Energy Council, who I work for, have a product accreditation program that we run on behalf of the Clean Energy Regulator. That basically means any battery that is sold in the Australian market has to go through certification to meet Australian standards. So, can the battery withstand Australian heat? Can it withstand Australian conditions if it's outdoors? If it's built in, if it's installed indoors, what kind of safety barriers does it need to make it fire safe or as fire safe as possible? So the batteries have to go through a certification through test labs, independent test labs, and then we accredit all that documentation to make sure that they've done all the testing and it's passed all that testing, and we accredit those products. So any battery sold in Australia will have gone through that certification accreditation program. There's about 750 batteries at the moment that have gone through that program, and the customer or the consumer can feel confident that it can withstand Australian conditions. The second protection measure is the new Energy Tech Code, or the NETCCC. That's solar and battery retailers who sign up to it, and what they're signing up to as a voluntary code is a bunch of sales and marketing practices that are good practices on behalf of the consumer, as well as after sales practices. The code was written by industry and consumer representatives, so it's got both sides of the market who developed this code. And it's, as I said, it's best practice in the way you behave, in the way you market your product, the way you sell your product, the information you give to the customer, making sure you go on site, making sure you visit the house, making sure that you properly fit it and look at the customer's bill to understand their energy needs, so you give them the right size solar and battery solution. So that code's a really important code, and there's probably been a couple of cases recently in the media where retailers who have been operating outside that code have behaved quite poorly in their behaviour, and the ACCC is conducting a review into those sales practices. So I would recommend for customers to look, I call it the blue tick. It's a blue and white tick. If the retailer has that blue and white tick, they've signed up to this code and they've signed up to good practice sales behaviour.
Yeah, because I remember, and so I'm assuming this replaced the approved retailer program that used to be in place.
Correct. It's gone from an approved solar program to a NETCC, which is all products. So it's solar, batteries, and other behind-the-meter products and services, which we'll talk about a bit later on about virtual power plants, but they're also covered as part of this code. So it's a really important thing for consumers to look for, is this blue and white tick, and that knowing that they're dealing with a retailer that has signed up to those practices.
Yeah, and I can be, very confident that if a retailer's gone through that process, they'll be demonstrating that loud and proud, either on their marketing, ID badges,
Correct.
any sort of collateral that they have, which is customer facing, so the consumer knows they can be reassured that they're dealing with such an organisation. All right, that's good to know. So, Con, whilst any federal rebate is always warmly received and supported, obviously there's always going to be a percentage of retailers, installers, either underpricing systems and cutting corners in the install, just to get market share, or overpricing systems for financial gain. It's just the nature of the beast, and this isn't just in our industry. This is across the board, and isn't also rebate driven. It's just behavior, unfortunately. I mean, what processes are in place to mitigate this and protect consumers?
Yeah, so the NETCC again is a starting point. If you're dealing with a retailer that's got the blue and white tick, as I said, if something goes wrong with installation or the product itself's not functioning the way, that provides a mechanism for you to raise a complaint and for that retailer to manage that complaint on your behalf. You don't have to chase around your installer or the manufacturer. The retailer takes on that responsibility for you. There's some simple things that consumers can do. If you're buying a solar and battery system, it's probably like an investment in a car these days. Not as much as a new car, but maybe a second-hand car. You take some precautions, and it's things like you'll shop around. You won't potentially buy the first car that you see, but you'll shop around. You'll do a bit of research on that car. The same practices apply here for the solar and battery. Like, don't buy the first thing that you see online or that you hear about, but shop around, read some reviews. people like yourself, Energy Matters, look for groups like yourself who operate with reputable retailers and OEMs. So I think there's an opportunity for customers here to do a bit more research rather than just jump onto the first thing that they see and think that's the right thing for them. Sometimes, you know what that saying is, if it's too good to be true, it probably is not true. So my advice would be shop around, get yourself a couple of quotes, look for good reputable places like Energy Matters to help you with steering you in the right direction as well. So that would be my recommendation.
Con, you're an absolute legend. I'm going to have to film with you on a TV commercial because I couldn't have said it any better myself. But look, absolutely. And for anyone listening, watching, I mean, most of you guys have come through Energy Matters at some point to get a quote for the renewable energy technology. I have peers in the industry as well that do the same thing as us. And it's certainly worth, sort of jumping onto one of our sites, getting 3 quotes, comparing not just the different products available, but also the retailers. Because, you're going to gel with, not necessarily, they all might be, quoting the same product, but potentially you're going to gel with one retailer over another. And there'll be potentially some variances on price point. One point I will just quickly make, Con, before we go to the next question, not so much for you, but for anyone watching or listening, is, a lot of the time people do shop on price. And the problem that we've always had in this industry is what we call the race to the bottom, where whoever, quotes the cheapest price is the one that gets the business. I think those of you who've installed solar power technology over the last 10 years and paid bottom basement prices probably now would realize that it's better to actually do the research and invest in quality as opposed to just going with the cheapest quote. Because unfortunately, a lot of the time, your technology, the good thing is there are processes in place now, as Con's articulated inside of the approval process to allow products into the country and to be used on any type of program, but also sold into Australia. But at the same token, back in the day, that may not have been as tight as it is today. And at the same token, it's also the quality of installation that makes a massive difference. You can have 2 people installing the same system. One will work perfectly for the next 10, 15, 25 years. One will stop working after 2 or 3 or may not work at all because of the way it's been installed. So it's always important to understand sometimes at a slightly higher price, you are actually getting a higher level of workmanship, and you're also getting after installation care as well, which means if there is a problem in the future, these businesses have been set up to be able to still be operational 10, 15, 20 years later, where the fly-by-night is. I'm just going to give you quick, low prices, get in and install you, then probably Phoenix their business in about 1 or 2 years. Not knocking anyone that offers cheap pricing. At the same token, it's just about making sure, you do your research as a consumer, and obviously installers and retailers, you should obviously be planning to help that customer in the long term, not just today to get market share. Con, the 2 things that jump to mind, and having spoken to a lot of our sort of, retailer and installer friends, there's 2 kind of key concerns that they have with this program. I mean, it's fantastic. It's incredible. Now it's finally live. People can just go, get down to business and start quoting installing customers. But what's really becoming present is, really 2 components. The first one, which we'll talk about now, is really the lack of supply of product versus the growing and significant demand. What role and what systems can the CEC play in terms of dealing with this influx of new brands and models entering the Australian market, but more so assisting those that tick all the boxes to get listed as soon as possible? Because I know that process can, and historically in the past, has dragged out quite a long time. What are you guys doing to help shrink that process to help these brands get to market?
Yes, we've been running a continuous improvement program, the product accreditation program, to make improvements and to streamline the process. One of the things we've actually started to do more recently is we're now being quite transparent at the end of it, or the start of each month, how long the waiting process is for the inverters, the batteries, and the solar PV systems to go from the start of the application to approval process. We've made some internal resources changes as well. We've doubled our engineering workforce. We've gone from 8 to 16 over the last 12 months. So understanding there's more demand. Yeah. The one thing we've always said, though, is we won't compromise safety. We understand the important role we play, and we talked about before about making sure these things operate in the Australian standards and Australian conditions, and make sure that customers feel confident what they're getting is a good product. So we won't compromise making sure we do the process correctly. So the recommendation I would make to OEMs is, before you do lodge your application for accreditation, if you've completed all the the testing, you've got all the right paperwork, and you've submitted a full application. Often, once we get to the time of reviewing the application and conducting the accreditation, there's paperwork missing or it's not fully completed, and we have to go back to the OEM, and there's a bit of chasing, as you can imagine, with emails back and forth. They take a bit of time, and that slows the process not only for that manufacturer, but everybody else that's in line then has to wait to that applications being completed as well. So if I can give one tip for the OEMs is please make sure you've got all the paperwork, it's all been completed, you've checked it yourself, spend that 10-15 minutes before you hit submit to make sure it's all there. That really helps. And as I said, we're making process improvements ourselves in terms of more people. We've streamlined the application, who reviews the application at what stage. So we've got some process people who will look what I would call it the non-engineering aspects, so they can get through things like ABN, name of business, trading name, all that they can get ticked off. And then the engineering aspect of it will get handed over to the engineers to review, and that seems to also help speed up the process. So we're making those changes. We understand we need to get better, and we're doing that. But I also would recommend to the OEMs that for them, before they hit that submit button, that they've got all the paperwork. Even if it takes an extra night for them, it's worth it for them.
Look, I completely agree with you. And look, first and foremost, it's really reassuring to hear, the fact that CEC has listened to feedback, has looked internally, looked at ways to, to actually become more efficient and improve your processes. Obviously, engaging more resources is absolutely fantastic as well. But I also agree, like in respect to making sure any applicant is dotting the I's and crossing the T's, because, unless you've got like a robust, complete application, what you're going to do is just, sort of cause bottlenecks by submitting something that's incomplete. So it's just lackadaisical to take that approach. So no, fair call, mate. Good to hear. Is there any support for manufacturers to assist with potential supply chain issues?
It's unfortunately it's a bit of that boom and bust that the manufacturers got to deal with increasing demand, and then if demand drops off, having to deal with stock that's sitting in warehouses. We continuously work through, we have our member OEM reference group, and we work with them to actually understand their business needs. And when significant issues come up from a supply chain, we'll take issues to government and seek government support to help alleviate, especially if it's a regulatory barrier or some decision they've made that's created the decline in the demand or the increase in demand. I mean, the really good example is the cheaper home battery program. Through our experiences through the state schemes that got announced at one time of the year and then didn't come into implementation 6 to 9 months later, there was that lag and demand dropped off and people were left with stock. So the decision by the federal minister to allow sales to occur without turning these on till 1 July was to try and address some of those supply chain issues. So where we see supply chain issues and there's something that can be done from a government perspective, from a policy position, we'll take that up on behalf of our members and advocate for our members to try and remove those bottlenecks or to try and increase demand where demand's been dropped off because of decisions made that are future looking rather than current. So that's sort of the role that we provide to our membership.
Awesome. No, that does sound right. And I can't imagine anything outside of that scope, to be fair. So CEC, can you give us a leg up, some a cash injection, or or just like keep the borders open, allow some more access to the ports? No, so look, I certainly get it, and really, this whole program, this whole industry is a team sport. So I think fundamentally, for the first time in a long time, it looks like every state government, federal government, manufacturers, associations, organizations, retailers are completely aligned, and the end user is also aligned now because they really do understand. If they don't understand the impact of global warming and climate change, they certainly understand the impact of rising electricity bills. Yeah. So, it's definitely a great time for everyone to get together. And this program looks like it is going to be the catalyst which helps achieve net zero and get to 100% renewable, which is my goal. And I know a lot share the same goal in as soon time as possible, which is amazing. The other, I suppose, bottleneck we see is as demand increases, we're not talking just a few hundred batteries there. We're talking hundreds of thousands, potentially going over 1 million if the program is as successful as we hope it can be. There's only so many installs any organization can do. And let's just make the assumption they've got product to install. But there's going to be a workforce impact at some point as well, just with qualified trades, electricians, installers. Is there anything else that's in play that can be helped or assisted with to help the deployment of more workplace guys?
Yeah, look, that's an interesting question because as an electrician, Sparky, you're sort of torn, right? Like you go and run off and do some work with a building construction company that's building new homes and new commercial sites and get a steady income from them, or do you come and install a solar battery system? I think the beauty of this cheaper home battery program now, it actually has created some certainty for the next 5 years. We're going to have, we're trying to install 1 million batteries. So if you're deciding whether do I go down another route as an electrician or do I go down the route of solar battery installations, you've now got a market for the next 5 years. So not only for yourself, but you can now bring on apprentices and train them up as well. So there's this certainty of 5 years now that if you're thinking about making a decision which way you're going to jump, it's actually a really good market now for the solar and battery installation side for the electrician. So that would be my advice to them, that now's the time to jump on board. You're going to have 5 years of certainty in this market. And, as you mentioned, once we get scale, and the scheme winds up, who knows, we start talking about 1 million batteries being installed now, but the Australian Energy Market Operator, they do their annual plan, or the once every 2 year annual planning report. And in that, they were talking about 3.5 million batteries potentially that we'd have by 2040. So there's still potential another million or 2 million batteries to be installed if we to reach those targets. So there's a strong market, and this cheaper home battery program is a really good signal now to electricians and for apprentices to say there's a market here that's ongoing and enduring for you.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at it like a cake, I mean, fundamentally, by having something like with solar power so widely adopted, and initially with the the sort of the way the STCs were assigned, starting with a really high multiplier, then gradually widening down, it caused a lot of demand, which in turn, when you have demand, you can reduce the cost of manufacturing comes down, the actual overall cost to the end user comes down because of demand. And batteries have always been like that kind of initially very, very expensive because there was low demand. They were kind of, they had to obviously price them accordingly. But now we have that demand coming through. And this happened before the rebate. We saw the cost of batteries coming down, which was amazing. Through this program, when you consider you got like hundreds of thousands of batteries now being deployed in Australia, 1 million plus, happening, then of course, manufacturing processes are going to naturally take place and improve. And that's going to once again see efficiencies being made across the board. So really, you've hit the nail on the head when you're considering what would you do if you're a youngster looking to get into a trade. Because being a Sparky now, especially as a young bloke or young lady, sort of getting into working out what you want to do for career-wise, it would be an absolute golden ticket. You've got a 5-year program you can work in. You can work in something that's amazing and making a difference and helping transform Australia into a net zero or 100% renewable organized a country, or superpower. I remember Kane saying to me a long time ago, which is absolutely bang on. And then beyond that, you've got such great industry, but then you've got skills that you can then sort of like go into various aspects of electrical engineering or as an electrician. So it is an incredible time.
And Ross, sorry to interrupt, but what we haven't had yet is the EV boom as well that comes with for those people who are thinking of getting into this industry. And once we get people doing mass replacements of their vehicles with EVs and the charging that goes with that, the market, the world's are oyster in terms of this market.
Is there any going off topic very quickly? Any rumors about an EV program or EV charging program or something else complementary downstream? Any words in Canberra that you can reveal?
We've been pushing. Part of our advocacy to get the battery program was to include EVs as a storage device. They're a little bit reluctant at the moment because the technology is still new and trying to work out a fair rebate to give the charging industry some certainty and to bring that price point down was difficult, but it's definitely something that's on the radar. They're aware of it, and they know that getting EV charging to people's homes is an important part of the charging industry as well. I mean, we'll have public infrastructure that's going up at the moment, but the home charging is one that will really drive the real benefits for the households. So,
yeah, look, it's a very exciting time. I think as soon as you have vehicle to load, like or vehicle to home, and be able to use your EV to actually power your home legally, then you've got a 100 kilowatt hour battery in your car, if not bigger. I mean, that'll power your home for 3 or 4 days. And then once again, you've got, everyone should have battery storage anyhow, just to manage early morning, late evening, but also blackout protection. As I know, as I said earlier, and everyone's probably bored of hearing, with our poor cyclone a few months ago. But it's only when you have a blackout for an extended period of time, you really get the impact on every aspect of your life, and how important battery storage and blackout protection actually becomes. So as well as obviously solar powering your home throughout it. So on that, and let's just look a step further and say, right, well, you know what? Consumers have said, I want to now get battery installed. I've got solar power, or they haven't had solar or batteries installed until now because it hasn't made commercial viable sense for them. So they're at home, but they think, you know what? Now I can get them both installed. They go ahead and get battery or solar and battery installed. And now they've got potentially all this excess electricity that, they're not using, and it's set in the battery. The battery, in my case, my battery's fully charged by probably about 11:30 tops every morning, depending on how much I discharged the previous night. So let's talk about VPPs. What are the real, from your perspective from the CC, I mean, what are the real tangible benefits about joining a VPP program?
Yeah, look, the VPPs to me is really the golden ticket in this whole reform program, right? Like, you get your solar and battery, and it's great for your household. You're reducing, as I said, your bill up to about 80% potentially, which is great. But the VPP is there'll be households out there who decide that they don't want to get a solar battery system, or they're just in circumstances financially or in living circumstances they can't get solar batteries. The VPPs is where those households get the real benefits, because basically it means your neighbour who's got a solar battery system is not only using that generation storage for themselves, but they're sharing it with you, and they're sharing it at times potentially when you need it, and the prices would otherwise be high. We'd have to build big power stations to meet that demand. Now we've got this stored energy in people's homes, and we're aggregating all these individual households into this virtual power station. So rather than having to build these big power stations to meet this demand, we've got them in people's homes, and we're aggregating them together. So that's the real benefit for me, is the ability to share your excess energy that you stored in your battery and you don't need with your neighbours and other people in the neighbourhood who may not be able to get the solar battery solution and keep their cost down. It just means that we're using that distribution network more efficiently, and if we use more power on the same poles and wires, that means it's cheaper for everybody.
Which is amazing. And I know this is probably, you just answered a massive question to a lot of people that have seen the information being conveyed. And there's always been that messaging saying, this program will not only help those who have got solar power or want to install solar batteries, but also help everybody else. And that's kind of fills in that point about everybody else. It's really, when you're, discharging your own battery back into the grid, you don't need it all. Inadvertently, you're helping out your neighborhood, like your community, especially those involved in such a program. Do you foresee any sort of federal support regulation to ensure that VPPs out there, the models that are actually going to be emerging, are accessible, reliable, and actually beneficial for households as they shift to that sort of more methodology?
Yeah, there's probably a couple of things. One of the things we haven't really spoken about the cheaper home battery program is the battery that's been installed has to be what they call virtual power plant or VPP ready or enabled, which is great. That means from the customer's perspective, once they're ready to sign on to one of these virtual power plant services, they don't have to do anything else to their system or battery. They don't have to get anybody else to come to their home and to do any additional wiring or to do any additional work on it. That's great. That's a tick that gets you ready for it. Secondly, there's a couple of state schemes that are complementing the federal battery scheme. Like Western Australia have got their own battery scheme, but also the requirement that if you get a battery under the federal scheme and use the WA scheme to top up the rebate, you also have to join Synergy's virtual power plant. So you automatically go into virtual power plant there, which is great. New South Wales changed their peak reduction program, where they moved the rebate under that program away from the upfront costs of the battery to joining a virtual power plant. So again, there's an incentive now for customers to join a virtual power plant and get a rebate for it. So again, it's making it easier and more accessible. And the third thing, which, and give you a bit of a sneak peek into some of the discussions we've had with the federal department, is they only had 6 weeks to get the regulations out for this program. So they knew they had to work hard to make sure it's ready to go from 1 July. But we talked to them about the South Australian battery scheme from a few years ago. And the success of the South Australian scheme was the South Australian government, again, required batteries to be VPP ready, and then promoted the virtual power plants to the people buying the batteries. And they had significant uptake of solar and battery and virtual power plants under that scheme. And it was as simple as doing a website, talking about what a VPP is, educating consumers about it, and then pointing them to all the different providers in the South Australian market. So the federal government are aware of this, and the next stage of the work that they're looking at is to see if they can do something that's similar to what South Australia is, and put that information out there for consumers to make them feel reassured what a virtual power plant is and how they can join one pretty easily.
Yeah, which is absolutely incredible. I mean, I really, one thing that really warms my heart is when you see the state governments really just come up with some incredible initiatives and just really drive, a program that can transform their own states. And South Australia, have done a fantastic job. I mean, admittedly, they had a number of issues, obviously, with their infrastructure and the amount of blackouts occurring. So they had to come up with something, and they were really onto it and did. And then obviously, as you said, the WA have been onto it. Victoria's had programs for ages. New South Wales government, we love. I mean, they've just, we're gutted, actually, to be fair, when they removed double stacking for that short few days. There's a few days where we're like, oh my God, you're going to be able to double stack in New South Wales, get the federal rebate and the New South Wales government rebate, and then that wasn't the case. But for them to then respond with a really good VPP program, fair play to them. That is awesome. So I think it's really an opportunity for people to start to explore VPPs, because it really does allow you as well just to get, improve that return on investment and quicken it. I mean, the fact that the cost of batteries are coming down and then you've got a 30% rebate just makes, you can actually get a decent ROI now, similar to how solar power used to be about 3 or 4 years without the battery. So that's now achievable. But then you also factor in the fact you can actually, ship electricity back into the grid, via VPP and support, and potentially support a community as well. There's ways of obviously getting demand rates for your electricity through Amber and various other programs out there. So there's a lot of really, really good stuff, which is amazing. Con, I'm going to take the conversation, and I'm not, I apologize. I'm not trying to sort of put you on a spot here or anything, but I think, from I'm just going to look at Energy Matters audience. So we've been around since 2005. We have lots of early adopters. We used to be a retailer. We're one of the, if not the biggest in Australia, one of the top 3 for over a decade. And we had a lot of early adopters. A lot of people came to us, and they didn't get solar power because, it was going to give them a return investment. Yes, there's really good feed-in tariffs and, the PFIT, where it's premium tariffs, which are amazing, but more so because they really care about the environment and care about, sort of transforming the planet. And, they really knew that they could make an investment that was going to, that, they can manage. And it was a lot back in those days, but they knew they were doing some good for the planet, which is really what we exist for as Energy Matters as well. I think one of the biggest concerns a lot of people have when they have, older systems on their roof that either we installed 20 years ago or other organizations installed 15 or 20 years ago, and they kind of see they're not really, those systems are now starting to, stop working as well, or they've kind of early adopters even of battery technology because they thought, this makes sense. And now they're thinking, there's some really incredible tech out there. I really need to upgrade my system. So one of the key concerns they probably have is around, recycling and around all this technology going into landfill. So is there anything that we can, has had been much traction around recycling, around, forecasting what's going to happen to all these lithium batteries in 10 or 15 years time when they eventually become end of life and have to be sort of, changed to something new?
Yeah, there is a bit of work. My statement position would be that the speed of the work has been slow. There was a national product stewardship program that the federal government was looking at in its previous term to develop. That went a little bit quiet during its last term. We're hoping that gets reignited. The New South Wales government earlier this year has taken a bit of a lead and legislated for a state-based national productivity scheme, and the New South Wales EPA has started with batteries as the first area that they're going to look at developing a product stewardship program around the New South Wales scheme. So, I mean, taking the lead like that. It's the biggest state in Australia. It's central in terms of its location. So I think it's great that the New South Wales government and New South Wales EPA have done that. It'd be great to get that national scheme up and running, the National Product Stewardship Scheme up and running again. There's a lot of good work and a lot of policy thought that went into how to devise a scheme that can help the solar and the battery industry. The biggest issue for solar obviously is the glass and the silicon. There's just the capital cost of recycling that is very high, and it really, and being an infant industry in terms of, yeah, we've got panels that are 10, 15 years, but it's sort of the first cycle of those panels now coming off people's homes. It really does need support, and there's an opportunity for the government to show some leadership and step in and help diffuse some of that capital cost. And again, a bit like the solar they did with solar PV and the way they're doing with cheaper home batteries, give it the support to get the industry up and running and create scale and opportunities, and really drive that end of life industry part of the, also end of life part of industry up going as well.
Yeah, which is absolutely bang on. And I mean, from my perspective, I mean, we've got we work with most of the global manufacturers of renewable energy tech, and so when we visit their sites, the locations, be it wherever, made in China, we're always asking the question about how they're designing the products today and the components they're using, with recycling in the back of their minds, and they very much are, very mindful of that. So, which is amazing to see. But really, as you said, like in Australia specifically, and any other country, putting up, really having some sort of federal support around managing end of life and recycling and investing in those processes. Because I know it's incredibly expensive, and I've got a number of mates who are in that recycling space and looking and exploring. But without funding, they'll be out of business in seconds. Because it's just almost, you can't charge. I mean, fundamentally, it's like you have to charge a homeowner a significant amount of money to recycle and remove their panels and then recycle them. So, which isn't going to help. So you really need to kind of find that balance, and having federal support would certainly make a difference. So I'm glad you guys are fighting the fight, Con, because it means, we don't have we can just report on it. And at the same token, I mean, we'll always be voicing up and saying, giving our opinion. But at the same token, it's really reassuring to know the role the CEC is playing in all of this. And look, not just yourselves. I mean, every association, organisation, Smart Energy Council, obviously, Energy Efficiency Council. There's been like every association or authority in Australia has really. It's actually nice to see you all playing well together, and actually and coming together on this. It's been great.
Look, I think we can, putting aside that we work for different organisations, the end goal for us is, the Clean Energy Council and the other associations, what we're trying to do is create a sustainable future, a future that's built on renewable energy, and then both at the start of the life and the end of that life, the product, we want to achieve the same outcome. So our core objectives as industry associations are the same. So yes, of course, we agree on both the cheaper home battery and the solar SRES program, but we also agree on the need for national leadership around product stewardship for end of life as well.
No, absolutely amazing, mate. Well, look, thank you so much for your time today, Con. I really appreciate it. You've been an absolute legend.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Rosh. Thanks for having me on. And hopefully lots of people get those batteries into their homes as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Good man. I'm sure it's going to be a crazy uptake. So that's Con from the CEC, absolute legend. Great to chat to him. First time we've actually spoken, so it's a really, really good conversation. And look, for anyone watching or listening to today, it is the time to definitely explore battery storage. I mean, I've said this on every podcast. It just seems to get better and better. But panels have been flatlined for a while now. Now batteries have finally got the rebate program in place. You can really capitalize. Just be mindful of one thing: batteries. This program is going to be around for 5 years, but every single year, the value of the rebates is going to drop. So similar to how panels were. So really, you need to get in fast and to at least get quotes in to understand what you're looking for, what you need, and then really try and aim to capitalize on the program before before end of June next year, so you can really sort of benefit from the full multiplier. Don't get me wrong, as the rebate drops in price, I mean, I think the goal is that obviously with demand, the cost of the actual products will come down too. So you're still going to get pretty much the same net impact. But really, getting involved as soon as possible means you can actually start saving your bills as soon as possible. And more importantly for us, reducing your carbon footprint. All right, so there's our website below. If you haven't gone solar yet, or have got solar but not a battery, get a quote from Energy Matters and we'll help you out. Thanks for your time. See you next time.